It's a big one.
That is heavy.
You know what? I just kind of skimmed ahead a little bit, and I just kind of glanced at some of the notes that you had written down.
Yeah.
I really want to hear your take on this.
So what the listener doesn't know is that whenever Nick fails to write the script and review the questions, I intentionally put in things that will scare him. And so in the original draft, I had put as my note under this question, I put just sleep with him already and get it over with. And so Nick was like, okay, I have very different advice than that. But then I rewrote it, so now he's not terrified. But, you know, when I hear this question, obviously don't sleep with him. When I hear this question, I think, you know, to me, this sounds like a relationship where you don't have the ground rules, right? And you don't have a known identity of the relationship. Like when you go to work with your coworker, you know, that's your coworker. And then eventually they might cross that line and become your friend. And now you treat them as a friend. And then eventually you might date them. And now they're your lover. And like, so we have identities of the people in our lives. What I'm noticing here is there's not a clear identity. This guy doesn't identify completely as your brother. And I see that he's flirting with you and he's like trying to get into your space and you're pushing him away, which I totally understand why you're doing. And I actually think that was the right first step. But you mentioned that hasn't been successful. So actually my advice is going to sound a little weird. It's to go the opposite direction. I think that you should define the relationship wholly and completely as a family relationship, that I am your sister and not available for anything else. And I almost think that you do that by spending more time with that person, by creating a family closeness. That way there's no space for mystery or uncertainty about what this is, that you would be more of a sister at him, I guess, than to elude him or to evade him and to let him imagine what this is or to have fewer data points to base his opinion on. So I want the guy, the stepbrother, to come to conclusions based on lots more interaction about you defining the relationship than less interaction. And I realize that you're throwing dice on that, Nick, but I think that coming in closer and trying to define it as a sister relationship, a brother-sister relationship, and trying to do more of that. And she said she has another sibling. Do more at the stepbrother that you're used to doing with the brother, I guess. That's my advice. I realize that carries a huge risk. So I'm sure you're happy to know that I wasn't going to give the advice of just sleep with him already. I put that in there to mess with you.
That's good.
Yeah, so I could see the relief on your face that first draft is not the advice that I gave.
My feedback is move out.
Oh, okay.
To me, I look at the environment. I mean, the thing that she says in here that stuck out to me is, I lost the line, but essentially saying, I hate feeling uncomfortable in my own home.
Yes.
Yeah. And this being, your parents' extra house, I'm not sure, what your financial situation is if you're living there because it's cheap and affordable. And believe me, no one understands that better than I do. I've lived in some pretty terrible places just because it was cheap. But you have value yourself. Your mental health has value. Your level of comfort has value. And if that means that you need to move out, get a place of your own, get a small 1-bedroom place that you can just make it your place and only your place.
Right.
That might be something to consider.
That's a good point. I think you're probably right. I think there is a financial reason why she's doing this, because she says she's 30 and he's 18, right? So there's a huge age gap. So if you're in your 30s and you're living in a parent house, it's because it's a financial benefit to you and it's saving some time in your life, and that's important. But that's good advice, that there is probably a safety boundary you draw, or a boundary where you say, listen, I'm just not going to tolerate this. And so one of the things I hear her saying in the letter is she's avoiding the scary ideas, right? Don't talk to the parents, avoiding things because she's afraid of losing the chance to live in their extra house. But I kind of hear you saying, Nick, take that fear off the table, right? Make up your mind that you have a backup plan, explore that, figure that out, up to the point of identifying where you're going to move into, whether that's with a roommate or a friend or on your own, whatever. And then, since you have nothing left to lose, go back and have the hard talk. Hit the nuclear button, talk to the parents about it, say, listen, I'm drawing a line. I hope this doesn't cause conflict for you guys, but all 4 of us need to talk about this, right? I'm bringing the stepbrother in here. We're going to talk about the awkwardness. We're going to call out the elephant. If it doesn't work out, I'll move out. But yeah, I can see your point that it's important to have that conversation, because right now this is unacceptable. Like, this is super weird, and nobody should have to live like that.
Right. And even if you don't want to get the parents involved, definitely I like that you set a boundary. You set a really hard boundary saying, this is not acceptable.
Right.
You are not going to talk to me that way. We are not going to have this kind of relationship. That's good.
Yeah.
Set that boundary, be able to enforce it. And maybe, enforcing it might mean, like, if this doesn't change, I'm out.
Yeah.
I need to get out of here.
That actually pairs well with my advice, because my advice is, clarify the relationship and then provide an alternative to it, right? So if you're hoping that this is going to be a crush kind of thing, I would like to provide the alternative of, I'm your sibling and I care about you, but in a very different kind of way, and fill that empty space. But you're right, that could totally backfire, and it could also just not be something he even senses. And if he continues to try to push, you've got to draw that line, because that is not cool. So I promise, Nick, that we will not hashtag today's episode incest. So I'm not sure what language I can use. But, Nick, this is something I think a lot of families in America have experienced now. I mean, there's a lot more blended families. There's a lot more folks that have young stepmoms that maybe they kind of have like, oh, my gosh, this is somebody I could have dated in another life. Or they have siblings that are blended from different families, and they didn't really grow up with them, and they met them as teenagers. And it's like, well, I remember I had a patient who was a 15-year-old boy. His mom married this guy, and it turned out he had been going to school with this guy's daughter, and they had like flirted, and like now they were living in the same house. And so it's like, well, what do we do now? Like, is it weird that I have these feelings? So I don't think on its face, I feel like incest is the wrong word to describe that.
Yeah.
Like, clearly it is.
Yeah.
But you're also allowed to be unavailable for anything beyond the family relationship.
It's a complication of family roles, boundaries, relationships. It's a confusing situation of defining what those roles are and what these relationships are going to be.
But anyway, we're on the same page. Don't date your stepbrother, and I think try to lean in a family relationship and see what that means to fill that empty definition space, and hopefully convince him that you're not available. But then I think Nick's point is a great plan B. You need to have a fallback position. Don't be afraid to run away. Don't be afraid to hit the nuclear button. Don't be afraid to risk everything, because you absolutely cannot continue on with the way you're living, right? Yeah, your happiness and your comfort is vitally important to your survival. Absolutely. Good advice. Take control of your environment. Okay, our next one comes to us from Pika Panda 7067. Sociopathic boyfriend never loved me. The start of our relationship was like fireworks. I was sort of seeing his friend, so we got to know each other while hanging out. He was cute, charming, witty, thoughtful. We liked the same things, and we had same sense of humor. As soon as I stopped seeing his friend, we hung out and ended up sleeping together. He immediately said that I was his girlfriend, which I didn't think much of since I was head over heels into this guy, and asked me to move in with him. I wasn't ready for that, so I said no, which he understood. The next year was the greatest I ever had. We did so many things together, our families met, and we got along. Our lives were super intertwined. He bought me a new laptop since I didn't have a computer, and always took me out to eat. He would do little things that I thought was cute, and we had a billion little catchphrases. He never said anything about not being happy. A few days ago, we rediscussed moving in together, but he said no. When I asked why not, he said it's because he doesn't have strong feelings for me, and he hasn't had strong feelings for me since we started dating. He said he thought he would eventually like me more, but it didn't happen. He called himself a sociopath, said he's never felt love even towards his parents, and couldn't say much more. I asked him, "Are you breaking up with me?" And with a short pause, he replied, "Yes." What was real? Why would he do these things with me and for me if he didn't feel it? I feel like my whole relationship was a lie, and I'm an idiot for not seeing it. Great question. And that word sociopath, Nick, is here it is again. We've bumped into this term before, right? Lots of times. This comes up quite a bit. Maybe, Nick, can we start with a little bit of a discussion about that word sociopath? Because we should probably start there. Yeah, I think that'd be a good place to start. Maybe we can actually define what that is. Yeah. So for those who are listening, sociopath is kind of not a diagnosis word we use. It's a reference to a different one, which is called antisocial personality disorder. And so antisocial personality disorder is somebody who is completely disconnected from the human, enterprise. They are often people who become criminals. They are pathological liars. They're very aggressive. They're very cynical. They
and
can't
very
connect.
Charming.
And usually very charming. Like, they have the ability to manipulate and lie. But they don't connect, right? They don't connect to the human experience. They're usually numb to emotion.
Lack of empathy,
completely. So, like, these are people that when you think of, like, terrifying murderers like Charles Manson, that is somebody who was seductive and charming and hateful and cynical and completely incapable of even understanding the damage he was doing.
Right. When I was in school, the professor always used the example of Hannibal Lecter.
Hannibal Lecter, yes, right. So Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter, just completely dissociated from the experience of humanity and the fear and the pain he's causing other people. So obviously, guys, I think the first thing we would offer is sociopath seems to be a word we see in a lot of questions and a lot of men being described as sociopaths. And Nick and I were joking on the way here that most of the time they're not a diagnosed sociopath. Most of the time they're just an asshole.
Right. Yeah, and I think if it was occurring at the rate in which we would read about it, it would be an epidemic.
Right.
But yeah, when I read this, my automatic thought was, is he a sociopath? Probably not. To me, I would agree. He's probably just an asshole.
He's probably just a bad guy.
And it's something that, I feel like a lot of times, especially in dating, sociopath provides a great escape.
Yes.
Yeah, and an excuse.
It's not you, it's me.
Yeah, exactly. It is the 2018 version of it's not you, it's me.
It's not you. I'm a sociopath.
Right.
I have a diagnosed mental illness. I'm incapable of love.
Yeah, and even in that, it's like, back in the day when you said it's not you, it's me, there was still like some ownership.
Right.
Where now it's almost saying it's not you, it's not me either.
It's
my diagnosis.
Yeah, it's not you, it's not me. It's my broken brain.
Right. So is he a sociopath? Maybe not. But that doesn't change anything for you who's going through this.
Yeah.
It's still as hurtful. Whether he's a sociopath or whether he's just a jerk.
Yeah.
Man, that sucks. I'm really sorry to hear that this is going on, and just how it happened. Just are you breaking up with me in the short reply? Just yes.
And regardless and I think that's the interesting part of her question, because she says, I feel like my whole relationship was a lie. I feel like an idiot. And that's a great point, right? Because if he's really a sociopath, then you look back in the rearview mirror and you ask, was nothing real? What about all the days that you seemed like to be in love with me? We had little catchphrases. We were cute. Our families liked each other. Was any of that real? And regardless if he's actually a diagnosed sociopath or whether he's just a guy who's saying, I never loved you, you're going to question your own reality. And you're going to ask, well, was nothing real? But in my experience, people say that to invalidate history so they can arrive at a conclusion that's convenient for them today. It's a lot harder to say, no, I was actually in love with you and deeply in love with you, but I've fallen out of love because I fell in love with my chemistry lab partner and now I don't like you. Like, that sounds a lot more selfish, and it sounds a lot more complicated and a lot more like you should have guilt or shame for that than just saying, nope, it was never valid. This was never a real relationship. I have a problem. Or even if you don't claim to be a sociopath, just saying, oh, it never counted. I think it is escape. It's like you said, Nick. It's an escape from the relationship. My advice to her is, that is very unlikely. This sounds more and more like dude copping out and trying to create a space to run than it is him honestly reflecting on the tenure of a complicated and good year of a relationship and what it means and why he's walking away. It sounds more like he's just hitting the eject button and running, which still hurts, but I wouldn't believe his BS.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would agree with the statement about really questioning, what does this mean? What does this mean about everything else? Was everything a complete lie? Was I delusional? No, I think at least for you, it was real. It did mean something to you. It was very powerful. And then those moments are probably great, wonderful moments, and you should hold on to those.
Right.
And, with this, it sucks to have to go through this, but you can come out stronger on the other end.
Yeah, and Pika Panda, and I don't mean to kind of poke you in the ribs here, but as a therapist, if you were my patient and we were talking about this, one, I want to focus on healing, right? And I want to get you far away from the pain and get you to a place where you can think about this. But once you're in a place where you're kind of sewn back together and you're able to think about how this relationship went wrong, I'm going to bring your attention to how it started. It started with you dating him.